Now let's delve into that conversation with senior analyst from financial derivatives company, Dr. Adesola Somani joins us virtually from Reading. Dr. Somani, good morning and thank you for your time.
Good morning, Ini. Thank you for having me on the show today.
All right, so FDC sees inflation hitting 34.25%. Tell us what factors, I think mostly general, we live with them every day, but can you tell us the factors that FDC consider to hit this 34.25%?
Indeed, thank you, Ini. So we at FDC, we forecast, we see a marginal increase in inflation by around 100 basis points to 34.25 in April. And this is driven by a couple of factors. Number one is planting season, which is seasonality, I beg your pardon, which is typically associated with a scarcity of commodities. In addition to that, we've also seen petrol scarcity in April, which further pushed up prices. We also saw logistics costs going up, which contributed to prices going up. Finally, we saw the pass-through effect. Actually, in April, we saw the FX moderate, remain stable, or appreciate, I beg your pardon, quite significantly. And so that's moderating effect kind of moderated headline inflation. So that is why we are not seeing so much of a hike despite all of these factors. If you look at core inflation, which is headline inflation less seasonalities, we saw core inflation actually depreciates marginally by 0.6% to around 25.28 percentage points, to around 25.28%. And food inflation increased by around 100 basis points to around 41%. If you look at month-on-month inflation declined to about 2.7% from 3% last month, which kind of signals that, okay, a headline inflation is reaching its peak and we should soon expect it to change its trajectory.
Yeah, but I guess it would be too soon to expect the MPC to loosen or even hold, because the CBN governor has already hinted that, we are still on this hawkish stance.
Indeed, inflation currently is like near 30-year high, which is quite significant. I think it's quite important for the central bank to anchor inflation before it becomes entrenched. We're also seeing Naira weaken from being the best performing currency in, I think, end of March, to being the worst performing currency in April. These are important factors that the CBN needs to consider. And the recently completed IMF Article 4 consultation, one of the recommendations was to kind of anchor inflation, and unfortunately that may mean further increasing benchmark interest rates at the upcoming meeting next week. It's important to note also that already this year the central bank has increased benchmark interest rate by around 600 basis points year to date.
So that increase year to date, does it correspond to the reduction, if I could say, of inflationary pressure? Because inflation hasn't reduced, but I guess the pressure, the rate of increase has reduced. Can we say it's been worth it?
Indeed, one challenge of monetary policy in Nigeria, and as well as many emerging market economies, is the transmission mechanism, which is simply how the policy change affects the real economy. Here in Nigeria, the transmission mechanism is quite weak. Also, part of the drivers of inflation are structural factors such as insecurity, for example, and tightening would not affect that. But it is kind of signaling, the tightening kind of signals the intention of the central bank, and it helps to anchor inflation. So I would say that the tightening, particularly the significant increase in benchmark interest rate, has had some effect in moderating headline inflation so far.
Now, while we're having all of this, what's happening to our domestic prices? I know you did say it's planting season, so we expect a lot of the crops to be increasing in prices.
Essentially, so if you look at the domestic commodities prices, you see the the commodities without FX content, which have to do with planting, you see them increasing in price. If you look at the price of onions, it's up month on month by around 17%. Price of tomatoes is up also month on month 16%. And the price of peppers is also up month on month around 10%. But if you look at FX commodities that have FX inputs, you realize that partly because of the foreign exchange was quite stable in April, we are seeing a moderation in their prices. If you look at the price of rice, for example, is down around 15%. If you look at the price of noodles or margarine, they are both down 4 and 16% respectively. So I think that for these commodities that have FX content, while the FX was stable, was relatively stable, we saw some moderation in the prices. But for other commodities that have to do with planting season, we've seen the prices increase because of scarcity during this period.
Yeah, so Dr. Sumani, just before we let you go, how many basis points increase MPC next week?
Oh, FDC, we are expecting. I mean, if you look at the preponderance of the balance of probabilities, we think that it's more likely that they increase by around 100 basis points at the next meeting.
All right. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me.